To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Amy Forsythe is an award-winning military journalist who served 5 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, has been on assignment for several other overseas missions. Amy started her career as a U.S. Marine combat correspondent in 1993 and currently serves as a public affairs officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve. Amy recently published a book titled Heroes Live Here, which showcases the history of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. We're going to talk about that, Amy. And she was recently inducted to the Women's Museum of California Hall of Fame for the historian category. I've been tracking Amy quite a bit on LinkedIn, love her stuff, a communications expert extraordinaire. Amy, welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to connect here and share some stories.
Yes. Well, listen, thank you for that. The intro is good, just a thimbleful. So give us another minute or two. What more do we need to know about Amy?
Well, I currently also work as a federal employee on Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton as a public affairs officer. So I continue to tell stories and share the courage it takes to wear a uniform of our Marines, especially at a specialty command at Camp Pendleton. But I just went over 30 years of total service. So from the first days I stepped on those yellow footprints to still continuing to serve in the Navy Reserves as a public affairs officer. I'm assigned to Special Operations Command out of Florida, but aligned to Europe and Germany. So Special Operations Command Europe. So I'll do my Navy Reserve training there and then focused on the mission and the issues that they're working on there in Europe. And I live in Fallbrook, California, which is just outside the Camp Pendleton. But this has really been home for me, and just really continuing to tell the story of our service members and enjoy the Southern California. I lived on Guam for 5 years, so I've come back into the real world back here on the mainland. So it's great to be back. What
were you doing there, Amy?
Well, I was working for the Department of Defense, covering all the large-scale exercises that are in the Indo-Pacific region. Yeah. So I got to travel quite a bit. It's very real there. Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Palau, Guam, Japan, hot and heavy, a lot of exercises, joint exercises there, and really got to see a lot of the Indo area just on the road, traveling, covering stories. So that was a great opportunity.
Yeah, interesting. I did not know that. I wasn't aware of that. Well, listen, I ask everybody up front at the start of the podcast, if I didn't know who you were, I found out we're in an elevator, we're going 30 floors, and we don't have much time. I would say, Amy, I know you know leadership. What's your leadership philosophy? What do you think about leadership? What do you got to tell me in a minute and a half we're going to see each other?
Well, I think communication is always at the heart of good leadership, communicating, whether it's in person, writing, direct engagement with people. And so being open, honest, transparent, ability to communicate, whether it's one-on-one or in a large group, room filled with 1,000 people, learning how to communicate is really at the heart of good leadership and philosophy to learn those skills, whether you consider it a soft skill or a hard skill. Communicating doesn't come easy or naturally for a lot of people. So it could take some training. It takes practice. It takes continuous learning.
Yeah, I love that. I agree with that. And we're going to talk about communications. You're the first one I've had on the podcast with a specific expertise in the communications arena. So we want to wring some of that out of you a little bit later on. Well, the timeless question I ask everybody, leaders, born or made?
Oh, definitely made. I feel that it's a lifelong journey to be a good leader, and it takes required diligent research, learning, practice, and put into place. Although some people make it look effortless, like they were just born a leader, but those people too probably had maybe an early start or early opportunities to lead. I do think that birth order has a lot to do with it. So, for example, if you're the first one born in your family, then you naturally become a leader at an early age. So I was the firstborn of my parents, and I have a younger brother and sister, but they always looked to me to help, and my parents looked to me to help with them. And so that put me in a spot to have great influence and impact on them. I didn't know it at the time, but being a good older sister really was just the first step in a leadership journey.
You're the first one that's ever mentioned that, and it's just so obvious, common sense. I never thought about that, to be honest with you. Where did you grow up? What state?
California. So I was born and raised in Sonoma County, just north of San Francisco. So in Northern California.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm gonna look into that. I mean, I never thought. I'm sure people have done studies on it and all that. Makes total sense. It absolutely makes total sense. So,
not to say that if you're second or third or fourth born that you're not going to be a great leader, but it just gives those firstborn that first step into stepping up and learning how to be a good leader in your pack in the house.
Well, I've got two sisters. I'm the only boy, and I would say, using your example, I gave them both plenty of crisis management scenarios to handle. So I was not much of a leader back then, but I like to think I was contributing to their leadership development, So,
absolutely.
Poor girls. Well, listen, I always tell, I am of the opinion that leadership is a learned skill. Leaders are made. I think some people are born with more aptitude as leaders. However, if they don't work hard at it, people with marginal aptitude, if they work hard, I think they can get really good. In fact, Amy, I think they can get so good. I use the term world-class a lot in my material. I think that anyone with the desire and the willingness to put in the reps in what I call the world's leadership laboratory, I think they can not only get pretty good, I think they can become world-class. They don't necessarily have to be in a world-class organization. I think you can be a world-class leader leading the mailroom or the cafeteria or whatever. Any thoughts on this?
Well, the saying that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad people. And so I think our whole crux of why we stay in positions or why we're drawn to certain companies with certain leadership is because we want to work around these types of people. Yeah. And so if you can pack and stack your organization with world-class leaders and make an impact and have influence over people, I think that's what people crave the most right now. Or, I mean, they always have. This is a legacy trait, is that we want to be around great people who know how to lead. And organizations have found that is what they're really striving for. You can teach for skill and train people to do things, but being a leader is really the potential to be a great leader is really what I think organizations are looking for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Your background now, 30 years of military service, you've observed, worked with, trained, been mentored by a lot of leaders. So I'm going to ask you two questions. The first is the traits, habits, behaviors of the very best, and then the other side of the coin we'll get to of the most ineffective leader. So let's focus on the positive first. Are there any traits, habits, and skills that you think are common to most of the very best leaders?
Well, how you treat people makes the golden rule your most powerful leadership tool. So if you reframe the question, would you be happy working for you? And so you say, well, am I someone I want to work with? And so if we can just put ourselves in other people's shoes, that really is the first question we have to ask ourselves. But I feel that communication is really at the heart. Also, I think that great leaders also use the assume noble intent model of assuming that someone has noble intent in their heart that you work with. So when you assume that your entire workforce or your colleagues are all really amazing, great people, you're going to assume that until otherwise. And so it just makes it makes people that much better to work around. Also, great leaders know that they have blind spots. No leader can know everything about everything. And so when great leaders really exercise humility and understand that they might not see things, and so they rely on their trusted advisors. So say, in an organization, they have a legal department, a communications department, a financial department. So great leaders always turn to their trusted advisors for guidance, knowing that they don't know everything. And so I also think that great leaders have the ability to say thank you and say it often enough, because that will be remembered, and it means so much and makes such an impact on people when leaders can just have the politeness to say thank you for doing this, even if it's their norm and their job. Just sometimes saying thank you can be all that is needed to keep people motivated and keep people. It shows a authenticity that we all want.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. A lot of wisdom there. Let's turn the coin over now. Traits, habits, skills, behaviors of, unfortunately, we've all served with them, ineffective leaders at best, terrible leaders at worst. What do you see from them?
Well, two things. I think when people struggle with the communications piece, if they struggle doing, say, town halls, public speaking, Q&As from their workforce, they tend to live by talking points alone and get very nervous about speaking in public and afraid to demonstrate any vulnerability. If they're not active in their communities and they're really only show up for like the photo ops or specific things that might make them look better. I've seen that a lot working in communications. There are people who will show up and don't want to engage with people, or only they're in and out, or they really come and want to work and help and do things. I think that speaks volumes about someone's ineffectiveness. I think the great leaders can be breakout great leaders when they know people's names. And if you don't learn people's names, you're not going to be really an effective leader. Yeah. And leaders today, they have so much on their plate. It's understandable that they don't really know people, but if you get to know people, I think that helps. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The one thing that, I know is on your mind lately too, is some hubris and arrogance, overall lacking self-awareness. It's this cognitive bias when people with low ability or expertise experience a higher self-regard, where they think they know what's going on and they overestimate their abilities or knowledge. And so when those people have those blind spots and they don't know that they don't know, but act like they do, I think that can be treading on very dangerous grounds, because that costs people life and limb. And that's where people get into trouble, is when they don't understand what they don't know and they don't look for advisors to tell them otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so it comes down to arrogance and hubris, which is like the most, not only is it annoying, but it is very dangerous when we're talking about, leading large organizations.
Yeah. I think leading in general, I think, I teach that, character and integrity is a given. And that you have to like people, and you have to know that you're going to be helping them deal with their problems. To be a great leader, I think you have to love people. You actually have to love dealing with people and all that. But I want to hear your thoughts on this. I don't care whether it's a person who's 50 years old, been in a company for 30 years, or a high school kid that just graduated and is working in the mailroom or the loading dock. Even the most inexperienced person, somehow, Amy, can quickly figure out whether or not their leader truly cares about them. Agree, disagree?
Oh, I agree too. I mean, I've worked as an enlisted Marine in some of the lowest positions. And when the feeling when someone really cares about you, they'll ask you your name or about your family. And so by using some of these techniques, great leaders can really elevate themselves in the eyes of their workforce to just show compassion and empathy. And I think that's what people are really looking for in a leader, is just showing a little bit of understanding and put yourself in their shoes. And I think that can go a long way. As the saying goes, right? People don't remember what you said, but they'll remember how they made you feel. And so that can go a long way. Whether you're working in corporate America, international companies, the military, or federal government, sometimes just that compassion and empathy can go a long way.
Yeah, I agree with that. So you mentioned blind spots. I am a big believer in those. I have them. And I want to put you on the spot. As a leader, looking back, do you have any of them bit you repeatedly? I'm going to tell you what my blind spot was after you share. And if you want more time to think about it, I can start with mine. But I think that the lesson is to every leader, you've done well, I've done well as a leader, but I still have blind spots. And I'll tell you, Mike Etor's number one blind spot since I've been a child is that I often mistakenly assume that everybody cares as much as I do and is as committed to the cause as me. And that can be a very problematic blind spot as a leader. Because, once the play is called as a Marine or a businessman, once the play is called, it may not be the play I wanted to run, but if it's option A and I wanted option B, I leave that door and it's an option. I'm option A, all about option A. I go sell it to my team. Let's go. And I continually make that mistake that everybody wants to work hard, wants to do it, and it has bitten me. And so I have to safeguard against that. Trust me, I've got many more, but that's the one that, and now on the flip side, to your point, I assume noble, positive intent. I think the best of people. I trust them. I verify, but I trust them off the bat. And so if you got to have a blind spot, I'll take that one, knowing that I'm aware of it. And so any thoughts on your end?
Well, people who are naturally gravitate towards joining the Marine Corps are all sort of A-type personality, ambitious, want to do things. And when other people don't share that, it becomes very frustrating. But I am like you. And at an early age and early upcoming in the Marine Corps, I was very blind to that other people didn't share that. And so someone pulled me aside and said, the problem you have sometimes, Amy, is that you're just too tenacious, and used it as a pejorative. And honestly, I didn't even really know what the word meant, but I took it as an insult, or I took it as a personal attack on my personality of being tenacious. And so that always stayed with me. And that knowing that maybe if I'm a little bit less, like I need to tone it down a little bit, like tone down my, let's do this, let's try that. Let's just do it. Why not? Don't let, so I think that's my blind spot personally. And so, but I share with people, don't let someone else don't let people steal your ambition or your drive or your goals, because there will always be people to do that. And that's what I love about your books. You're introducing the Stoic wisdom, because I never was exposed to this until, I would say maybe recently, like 10 or 12 years ago, and when I was getting my master's degree. And I'd like, why has this been a big secret? Why didn't I learn this in high school? My parents or from anyone else in the military, you'd think that would be the perfect place to teach some of that. But it gives you the framework to not let external forces impact your behavior. And, so I just love that it's out there and it's timeless. And so thank you for bringing that into something that people can use.
Well, a couple of statements on that. You're welcome, more than welcome. Relative to the Stoics and the ancient, the wise old men, I call them, I believe that every mistake a person could possibly make personally or professionally has already been committed by millions of people, sometimes over thousands of years. And all you have to do is read and study. If you're willing to do that, you can avoid easily avoidable mistakes. Because if you look back at every mistake you've ever made, personally or professionally, you're not the first one to make it. And someone else said, geez, I could have told you not to do that. I gagged on that 10 years ago, you know? So that's how I coach executives. I said, listen, I tried what you're about to do. I tried that 20 years ago, should have been fired for it. You know, I survived, don't do it. And here's why. And so I wanted to drop that. I also wanted to say, you know, you used the Marine Corps example about, you know, they told you were too tenacious. In the pure civilian sector, as a high, and I was a high level executive and now an executive coach, Amy, I was exposed to people that were making, no kidding, 7 figures a year that just didn't want to work all that hard. And I mean, from, you know, from lowest level of compensation to the highest level, not everybody wants to work that hard. And again, you know, Mike Etor is like, let's go and all of that. And there were some people, there's some non-Mike Etor fans out there. And I'm saying this for the audience, and I'm agreeing with you. I did not assimilate. I did not lower my standards. If I was in charge of a department, a function, a project, an integration of an acquired company, I and my folks were going to do our best to make it the highest quality possible. Now, almost everybody wanted to do that. Did we have some people on the team that wish they could have been C students instead of A students? We sure did. And I recognized that early on in the business world. And I realized he or she really doesn't want to work this hard. He or she knows they're going to work that hard. And at the first opportunity, they will avoid working with me. I was okay with that. I was okay. So my message, I'm going to need to comment on that. My message to the developing leaders out there is set your standards high and don't demean them or devalue them or lower them for anybody. Now, in business, as you know, Amy, you got to know when to go for an A+ on a project and a C is good enough. Sometimes adequate is good enough. But when it comes to leading people and treating people well, there's only A+ in my book. Your thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, we've all made these mistakes. It's funny, I tell Marines or service members or colleagues that I work with, I've made 1,000 mistakes. You don't need to make my mistakes, make your own, but don't make mine. I'm here to share with you and save you that heartache. And so that's why sharing these stories and anyone who'll listen to help prevent them so they can go further and faster in their own career and achieve certain milestones even more. And so the next generation coming up right now in leadership roles, and they have a lot of complicated problems to solve. And we need to get these leadership discussions out there even faster because they need this in order to achieve more in their own careers. And life is short, you know, they've got to reach milestones far greater than you and I ever did because they are in complicated roles and very real world stuff going on right now. So they need that framework to help them and their organization do things. The pressure is on to get to those milestones. A work or C work is fine too, but it is a fast moving train out there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, listen, you've mentioned communications several times, and I want to remind the audience that Amy is a communications professional. She knows this stuff. We could and probably should do a separate podcast just on communications, you know, practices and fundamentals alone. We don't have that much time. So I would ask you, Amy, when it comes to communications as a leader, if you had to limit to a few fundamental do's and don'ts of communications, what advice would you give if you're talking to a room full of developing leaders? Because via this podcast, you really are. So what principles, fundamentals and principles of communication must leaders keep in mind at all times?
Well, I think there's 3 questions that you need to ask yourself. These are just some baseline.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to work with General Mattis on his staff during the height of the combat operations in Iraq. And, he encouraged the entire enterprise to ask yourself 3 questions every day or every hour if needed. What do I know? Who else needs to know? And have I told them? And those 3 questions frame my day because I see myself as someone who can be trusted and counted on and to provide information. We've all shown up to a meeting at 8:00 that was canceled, but no one told you. And you know how frustrating that is when you show up, the meeting was canceled or something changed and no one bothered to communicate that to you. And that right there can cause a huge amount of distrust and it starts to break down the team environment. And so communicating, what do I know? Who else needs to know? And have I told them? And if you do that, whether at work, as a leader, within your relationships, your family, your spouse, I think that you'll find that improved communication will make you seem and be the leader of impact that you really want to be. Yeah. I also feel like your network is your net worth. And so as leaders, as thought leaders, if you're engaging with people, if you're meeting them where they are and communicating, whether it's in person, through email, telephone, text, on social media, you have to know that you cannot just have one funnel of information. You've got a whole platform of a variety of different ways that you're communicating. And so knowing how to do that and the tone and the method is so important. And so modern leaders are going to need to know how to reach people in all different levels and areas and places. And so it's not a one size fits all anymore. And so the leaders coming up in this generation need to know, is that a text? Is it an email? Is it a call? Is it a drive-by in the hallway, in-person sit-down meetings? So communicating, just knowing how to do that and making sure you are matching it. And so I do feel, though, that leadership coaching is also important for communication and make you have that confidence, to give you the confidence that you need to lead, whether it's a small or large organization. But is your communication skills where they need to be? And I've trained hundreds, if not thousands of people how to communicate on camera, with media, giving presentations. And so it can be very stressful, and we realize that. And so that's why getting, the training or coach is always helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. Little tidbit. I tell executives that if I had my way, the CEO, I would change the CEO acronym to stand for Chief Evangelist Officer. And the chief executive should evangelize the vision, mission, core values of that company over and over and over again, and to the point where everybody in that company can recite it and know it, much like a Marine can tell you the leadership traits and principles. I mean, we all can do that, from a very early age on. And so I love what you said. Now, let's go a little bit deeper on this. No matter the medium, text, email, voicemail, Zoom, or whatever, leaders at all levels have to communicate. And I think the fundamentals are probably the same from the lowest level to the highest. Obviously, the scope is different. Using your Mattis analogy, Mattis was a 4-star general in charge of a whole lot. You were probably in charge of a public affairs team, the staff NCOIC of a team. I maintain that you had the same responsibilities to communicate with your team as he did, albeit at a different scale. What do you think some of those base responsibilities are?
Well, I think understanding what people are wanting to know most. And so keeping your pulse on what are people saying. I heard this is what the impression is over here. So you really have to be asking questions of your workforce or your team. What do you think about that? Or what have you heard? What do you know already? Let me fill in the gaps. And so if you're just a one-way communicator and you don't really understand what is actually needing to be communicated, then you're not filling in the gaps for people because you're not asking, you're not curious. What do you know about this? And then let me tell you what's actually going on. Oftentimes, trouble in our organizations is just that. It's rumors, it's misinformation, it's not understanding. If the leader of an organization or leaders aren't communicating, then people will be very frustrated and they'll make up their own spin or their own impression if you're not communicating it often and thoroughly enough. And so the saying is that just about the time you're sick of saying it is when people finally start to get it. And so if you say, well, I already told them that last month, re-emphasize, foot stomp, say it again and say it again. And so, like you said, people should be able to recite the company's vision, mission, because the CEO is reiterating that. And so I think that it is important for people to, in order for them to live it and understand it, the top leaders need to be reinforcing that constantly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just again, from a business perspective, when I go into companies, I don't think I've ever and I quiz them, I test them on this. It's kind of a setup because I almost always know what the answer is going to be or the results. I have never been in an executive team where all of the executives, whether there's 4 of them or 8 or 12 of them, where all of them gave remotely the same answer on the company's vision, mission, brand promise, core values, the annual priorities. Like, what are your priorities for this year? And so, as you know, Amy, if the executives aren't aligned on it, it doesn't get any better outside of the executive suite. And I wanted to ask, so I made a statement there. Any thoughts?
Well, we see this too. I see it across the board, especially even working in federal government and working in the media as well, is that if you can't articulate that, then your employees aren't going to be either. And so regardless of what you're communicating, you have to have funnels of information set up and push and pull. You're pushing information, they're pulling information, setting up listening platforms. Are you getting a sense from your communications team? What are people saying? What's their impression? Where are people on this topic? And so I think that's overlooked a lot because it is so important that if you're only communicating once a year at an annual town hall, there's a lot of room for misinformation out there. And so early and often, especially in crisis communications, you have to know what people are saying. And I think really great leaders are on social media because that's where people are. What are people saying? What are they posting? What's in the comments? And getting a feel for how that even works. I see too many leaders not engaged at all. And so I have to ask, do you even really know what's going on in the real world? And even though it's a virtual world, it is the real world because that's what people are saying. So it's a listening post of sorts where you can really dial in your message because you heard so many things going on. And here's what I'm going to address based on that feedback loop and model.
Yeah, a couple things I want to peel back on that. First, going back to the Stoics, Aristotle said, nature abhors a vacuum. And as you know, when you open up that pickle jar, it's vacuum, the air goes in. The vacuum will be filled with air. And taken from a communications perspective, I've always glommed onto that. Nature, I tell my people, nature abhors a vacuum. If there's a vacuum of communications out there, it will get filled by other people with rumors, innuendo, incorrect. And next thing you know, your team is spun up on entire falsehoods. So as a leader, your job is to minimize, if not eliminate, vacuums. Any thoughts on that to amplify what you've already said?
Yes, well, and it can't just be the communications team. It really is from a leadership
Right.
as the voice of what it is. Now, communications teams like myself, and we can provide the guidance, but we should not be the ones to be the cheerleader. So the CEO is the coach and the leader, but the voice has to be coming from the people with the authorities and the approvals to say so. We're just the guiding the leadership. But I do feel that some leaders are afraid to get out front and afraid to tackle some of these misinformations. And they're focused on, the mission, of course, but really dialing that in and understanding where the vacuum comes from and why, and quickly with urgency put out any misinformation, but take to that as the most important task is understanding what people think, or these climate surveys and understanding the workforce. I do believe too that HR plays a role in that as well. So it's really kind of a trifecta: the leadership seat, the CEO, the HR, and then the communications department. We're kind of all working hand in hand, because I do feel that recruiting top talent requires an understanding of what we're communicating about the company. More and more, I'm hearing feedback that when people are applying for a job, they'll go and look up the company's social media and see what kind of voice do they have? What are they saying? What are the things they're talking about? Am I familiar enough with the CEO? Is that somebody who I want to work for? And so if he or she is not out front talking about things, an employee may not feel comfortable going and applying for that job. So now you've just lost out on top talent. And so it's kind of this three-way game of communicating that early and often, but then HR has to look at retaining and then recruiting new top talent, which will make or break an organization.
Yeah, I agree. I want to make a statement, an observation, and ask your thoughts on this, Amy. I think that most senior leaders, military for sure, but even in the business world, most senior executives are scared to death of social media. They look at it as something that could get them in trouble. And the other smart leaders realize, no, this is a great tool. This is a great tool to spread the message and prevent vacuums, because in the business world, anybody can go online and say, well, I heard they're selling their headquarters or moving to Arizona and all. Next thing you know, you got a whole workforce and a tizzy and all of that. So I'm going to ask you this. My premise is senior leaders did not grow up with social media. I did not grow up with, and you didn't grow up with it. You were pre-internet. You're much younger than me, but it was pre-internet. And so senior officers in the Marine Corps and senior businessmen, when pre-2001, they didn't have to worry about it. Now I say you have to be at least adequate at social media. And I see a tremendous amount of leaders who are inadequate. The reason why they're inadequate, they're not even on it. And so I've seen very good businessmen lean out there. And from the military, I got to tell you, my beloved Marine Corps, I think, is lagging. I don't see any senior leaders out there routinely doing it. And the Army, I don't know if you've seen this guy. There's a general named, his last name is Beagle, Milford Beagle. He calls himself Beags, Beags. I don't know him, but I'm linked up with him. And so I click on his stuff. So the algorithm feed, that guy is setting the precedent for social media interaction as a general officer. It's all appropriate. It's all timely. And if any military person or an executive is listening, go look this guy up. He's setting the standard for it. I don't know where he's learned it from, but he really is. And I'll bet you the majority of his peers across the services are like, I'm not doing that because I might make a mistake that could get me in trouble. And this guy's embraced it. And from what I can see, I mean, when he puts stuff up, Amy, sometimes hundreds of response. Great job, General. Yes, we served 32 years, together, I'll go and all of it. It's just awesome. So I want to hear your thoughts about, I'm talking to all leaders now. You're talking to the podcast audience, but especially those that have been around a while. You can't run from this. Social media is here to stay. Thoughts?
Yes, I would definitely echo that. I do follow Major General Beagle. He has really changed the game and set the example. I love getting his content and really paving the way and making it more comfortable. But you have to meet people where they are. And if your workforce is on social media and you're not, you're missing out on a chance to lead and be a thought leader and make an impact and be influential. And so the dynamics too are also shifting especially for military members, but there could be some civilians out there who have a large following who can also be your advocates for your organization, who have a lot of influence, who have tens of thousands of followers. And if you're not tapping into them and connected with them and watching and listening and learning, you're really missing out. And so using these, I won't say influencers, but people of impact, because information is the new currency. And so if you're not in the conversation, these leaders, these organizational leaders, commanding officers, CEOs, if you don't have a strong following on social media, I would argue that I just don't think you're that influential. If you can't be influential online and show who you are, what you're doing, and engage with people in a meaningful way, how are you really doing that in real face to face? And so we have these people within our organizations who have learned and mastered how to do that, who have a lot more influence. So it sort of upsets the balance of power, I would say, especially in the military. You could have a unit member, a sergeant, let's say an E5, an enlisted person in your organization who has 50,000 followers on Instagram. That's a lot of power. And so when you've got a CO or a CEO who doesn't know the difference between LinkedIn and Instagram and doesn't know how all that works. It could be very dangerous if you're not in the conversation, especially when it comes to crisis, because you're the one that's going to need to get out there and communicate something important when the time comes. So you'd better be having a running start. And if you don't know it, now is the time to get on board, dabble in it, get a coach if you need to, get someone to help you and monitor and help you create content. And there's actually an organization out there run by a Navy veteran who that's all they do is create content and monitor for C-suite, Fortune 500 people who don't have the time, or their comms team is not doing that. But it's so important from a communication and a leadership. Show your leadership through how you can communicate, whether it's funny, it's engaging, it's amplifying something good about someone in your workforce. You can say congratulations to them on a promotion through using these tools, and that will make you a standout and a breakout leader.
Yes. Well, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you a chance to talk about your book. It's behind you there. I see that Heroes Live Here. It's one of the most beautiful book covers I've ever seen. It's still on my coffee table in the living room. You sent me a copy. I love it. Thank you for that. So tell us a little bit about it. Why did you write it? What's its intent? Who's the audience?
Well, thank you. Heroes Live Here is just really a 20-year compilation of stories, photos, and memories from the Marines, primarily based at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, who deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. And so it's really a compilation of the honor, courage, and commitment that has been displayed. So some of the first Marines who were killed right after 9/11, and this was in 2002, and some of the last, as you remember, in August 2021, who were killed at the airport in Kabul were all from Camp Pendleton. And so in my research for the book, it's really a love letter to Camp Pendleton. But in my research, I learned that more Marines from Camp Pendleton who were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan were killed in combat than any other one base or station in America. So that is really a heavy burden for this region. But the community has come together and rallied around these Marines at Camp Pendleton. But just like generations before them, from Korea, Vietnam, World War II, we're all based at Camp Pendleton, and Camp Pendleton celebrated its 80th anniversary last year. And so in the book, some history of the base, and then even before it was a Marine Corps base, it has that rich California history here also in the book. But I tell you, I barely even read a book, let alone writing a book. So I'm not known to be a book reader, but that's why there's lots of pictures, there's big fonts on there, big writing, big text. And so I know that Marines, especially family members, Gold Star families, can appreciate. And I just wanted some closure and some comfort to those that were lost, who were really based at Camp Pendleton. There was, I think, more than 1,100 names are on this special wall on Camp Pendleton that were all based at the base, who went forward. And so I've gotten such great response, actually. So many people have appreciated me just doing a roll-up of some faces and names that we've all known and that we've talked about, and we say their names.
Well, I love it. Yes, it's a great book. The photography is exquisite, if I say so myself. And I don't want to let you demean it at all. There may be some big fonts on some of those pages, but it's well written. It's really well put together. So kudos to you on that.
Well, thank you. I partnered with a Marine veteran, a graphic designer, who created the illustrations in there and the graphics and the cover. And so really what was the catalyst, I'll share with you that I served with a woman named Megan McClung, Marine Major McClung, and here's a picture of her. She was killed in Iraq in 2006, and we placed a rock and with her name etched on it up on this hill on Camp Pendleton, and we named it the McClung Ridge. She always loved to run up that hill. And she was a Naval Academy graduate. She was a triathlete, and so her loss was just a big blow to our community. But the rock is up on Camp Pendleton, and a lot of people knew her, but that's kind of the catalyst with a lot of memorials on the base and museums and memorial gardens, and a lot of people don't know about it. So if you're ever traveling at Camp Pendleton, you can look up the book and find a map, and people can find it online. It's on Amazon, or go to my website, heroeslivehere.com, and I'll send you a signed copy.
Yeah. Awesome. I love you. Well, I put it on LinkedIn one time. I put a picture of my book and my copy of your book, and there were like hundreds of responses to it asking, and you were putting the link in there. So I got to believe you had a boost in sales for a couple of weeks or so, so good on you. It's well deserved as well. Well, listen, we're out of time, but I can't let you out of here, Emmy, without asking you the question I ask everybody at the end, the fantasy question. If you were able to bring back one leader from the past and spend a day with that person, who would you choose?
Well, I had to think about that question for a bit. You gave me the question in advance, and I did some thinking, and I thought, I would probably want to visit with Margaret Thatcher. Her style, her toughness, her leadership during very difficult years in the UK. Just fascinating. And really, without her breakthrough as becoming the prime minister, I just don't think that even in America we would have and be seeing as many women leaders in politics or in business without her paving the way. And so that's who I would say, Margaret Thatcher, who served as the longest prime minister there in the UK. Just fascinating story.
One of my personal heroes, the Iron Lady. I love her. I can't beat what you said. I will say this. I have several canned intros for these podcast episodes. and one of them is from Margaret Thatcher, and I will be inserting that on top of your podcast. When you hear it, I won't steal its thunder, but when you hear her, go to YouTube and look it up. You'll find a video, not my video, but you'll find a video of her saying it, and she brought down the house with what she was saying. And so I have tremendous respect for her, as did our president, Ronald Reagan.
Yes. Yeah. They had such a great relationship. And that was my first sort of coming up as a teenager, a young person that really had an influence on me, watching her break through a lot of barriers. And she gained the trust of British people, and despite a lot of criticism. And so that was my first and lasting impression of a woman leader.
It's a good choice, and I'm sure you have seen this. There's tons of video of her on YouTube in the House of Commons, and people are going after her, political debates in the House of Commons, and she's on her feet, and she thinks on her feet, and more often than not, she just cuts them off at the knees, tactfully and beautifully, and more often than not, you've got some guy saying, why did I even open my mouth? Because she took what I said, showed everybody how stupid it was, and made me feel like a fool, and basically had me say thank you to her because she did it so elegantly. So great choice. There's been a few that have selected Margaret Thatcher, so you can't go wrong with the Iron Lady. So thank you. Well, listen, our time is up. It's been a great episode. I selfishly would ask that you consider coming back to do another one.
Oh, thank you. I would love to. And I appreciate being in your network, because I just am so inspired by all of your posts on social media, and your books are, top notch. And I just really appreciate the connection.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thank you again, and have a great day.
Okay. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Heracles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.